All right, we can go ahead and get started. Dawn, did you want to kick us off?
Thank you very much, Nikki. Hi, Alex. So great to see both of you this morning. So good morning to everybody who's joined us and who is joining us as we get started here. My name is Dawn Nickel. My pronouns are she, her, and I want to acknowledge how grateful I am to live on the unceded territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. So I am the founder of the She Recovers Foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit public charity. We connect, support, and empower women and non-binary individuals who identify with women's communities who are in or seeking recovery. We are all recovering from something, whether it be from substance use or an eating disorder, trauma, mental health issues, or any other life issues from which we hope to heal. I'm really delighted that the She Recovers Foundation this fall is partnering with Pathlight, Mood and Anxiety Center, to offer a wonderful education series that consists of 3 skills building sessions, as well as a masterclass. So today is our very first skills building session. We'll be focusing on anxiety. On October 28th, we'll be focusing on depression. On December 2nd, on grief. On October 5th, so next week, next Tuesday, I'll be co-hosting a masterclass with Deb Roseberry, also from Pathlight. The name of that presentation is When Overworking Stops Working. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Nikki to tell you a little bit more about Pathlight and then to introduce herself, and then over to Alex. Thanks so much again, Nikki and Alex.
Thank you, Dawn. And Pathlight is a mood and anxiety center. We have comprehensive care. We have inpatient and residential treatment centers and partial hospitalization, intensive outpatient as well. And we use an evidence-based approach to healing. We use dialectical behavioral therapy, radically open DBT, CBT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, just to name a few. And we have multiple locations and virtual options. And Alex and I will have our information at the end of the presentation. So if you think that accessing a higher level of care is something that you're interested in, you can reach out to us after the presentation. And to introduce myself, I am Nikki Dubois. I'm an alumni and family liaison for Pathlight, Mood and Anxiety, and Eating Recovery Center. I'm a licensed master social worker in Texas, and I'm excited to give you a little bit more information on anxiety and how we can more effectively respond to that emotion. Alex?
Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Harrison. I'm an LCSW located in Denver, Colorado, and I have been with Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight Mood and Anxiety for over 8 years, mostly in the realm of therapy in our treatment centers as a therapist. And now I'm an alumni and family liaison, like my counterpart, Nikki. And today we're going to be talking to you guys about ways to have a better relationship with anxiety. And so you want to kick us off, Nikki, with sharing screens?
Yes. All right. So our agenda for today is to learn what anxiety is and its purpose, learn how to observe and identify emotions, learn how to track our mood. We are going to learn a distress tolerance skill, and then we will have a Q&A at the end. And I just want to give a disclaimer that we will be talking about anxiety as the emotion. We are not going to be talking about the clinical diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. And I want to make that clear because I don't want anyone to feel like they are undeserving of being able to examine their relationship with anxiety because they don't meet clinical criteria. If you have identified that your response to anxiety is not moving you towards your values and feels unhelpful, then you deserve to be able to look at that relationship regardless of clinical criteria or not. All right, and I threw a definition of anxiety from Webster on here. So anxiety is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome.
All right. So let's talk about anxiety in a little bit more depth here. So like all emotions, anxiety has a felt bodily sense, has a need, an emotional need that's tied to it, and usually an action tendency. So what do I mean by all of that? So first of all, our bodies and minds are really intimately connected. So we feel our emotions in our bodies. I personally tend to feel it in one of two places, kind of depending on the situation. If I'm feeling anxious because I'm not sure about like where I stand with somebody, like say I've had a really like difficult conversation or even like an argument with my partner, I feel anxiety in my gut. Like I might feel really, really nauseous very quickly and hot. Um, in a different scenario, which is more likely, like in the day to day, I tend to feel when anxiety is tied to wanting to perform well, being overwhelmed or uncertain, I tend to get really hot and flushed. So, I mean, it might even be happening right now, to be honest, because I'm speaking to you guys today and it feels important. I want to make sure I'm like connecting with everybody. So, how does my body respond to that anxiety? Well, I get really hot through here and kind of splotchy through my face and my neck, and usually like right over here, especially even like show up through my makeup. I'm always really aware of how my body is tied to that anxious feeling. You guys may also feel anxiety in your bodies, like tingling in your hands or feet. You may get really bad headaches. You may feel tension between your shoulder blades or in your back. It may be very tied to gastrointestinal issues for you. Bottom line, there's a felt bodily sense to almost every strong emotion that we feel, and anxiety certainly has a way of bringing up connection to body. Secondly, anxiety also has an emotional need tied to it. So, for example, if I'm anxious because I feel overwhelmed, the emotional need might be for clarity, for space, or for consideration. If my anxiety is tied to, feeling unaccepted, which comes up a lot in social anxiety situations, right? Maybe the emotional need is for connection, for belonging, for respect. So that's how we tie anxiety to emotional need. And also, anxiety usually has some kind of action tendency tied to it. So we have these responses that tend to accompany our emotions. With anxiety, more often than not, people's action tendency is to avoid, because anxiety just feels crummy, you know? The other thing that I want to say is that anxiety has a function, at least in the short term. So it readies us, it puts our bodies and our minds on high alert in case we need to move really quickly. And anxiety in the short term can be protective. So, as modern humans, we've evolved to have sophisticated thinking skills and a really rich and nuanced emotional experience. But there is also a part of us that is both evolutionarily basic and really strong. And that is the part of us that is quickly keyed into any kind of potential danger. And I included this silly cartoon here in the slide, just like they're sitting in the cave, they're saying like someone's at the hole. Well, back in caveman times, the realization that someone's at the edge of your cave, or there's a sound that came up at the edge of your cave, could signal like, oh, is it a saber-toothed cat coming in to eat us all? Is it another clan trying to take up our space? Is there some kind of weather event that's going to impact me? That feeling that comes up that readies us to either fight or flight or freeze response, right? So in its most basic form and in the short term, it can protect us. And in short spurts, anxiety can also help us perform. Say when we need to perform athletically or on a test, it can help us like be able to have laser focus on what's important in the moment when it's at its best. So moving on to our next thought here, if you can forward to next slide. A question that a lot of clients and patients have asked us over the years is like, why am I so anxious? So like, what creates and perpetuates anxiety? Well, typically it's one or both of a couple of these things. Our temperament, which is our wiring. Anxiety can also be tied to situational events. And then there's chronic anxiety. So what do I mean by these things? So when I say temperament, I'm really referring to how there are traits in us that tend to be hardwired. Some of us seem to be hardwired towards wanting very little change. We crave routine. We like concrete situations and relationships. We might be hardwired towards a high fear of negative consequences. So, or maybe you might be wired towards being a super feeler. That's a term that we use a lot at Pathlight. And what we mean by that super feelers are the folks that are really sensitive and naturally just attuned to emotion, both their own and the emotional experience of others. All of these temperament traits can lend themselves to anxiety. And, these traits can be 100% harnessed for good. For example, somebody that's a super feeler might be like an amazing therapist, or somebody that really craves like little change and wants concrete, situations in relationship might be really good at highly specialized career paths. But these kinds of temperament traits, if they're left unchecked, can also feed into really unhealthy levels of anxiety. So from a situational perspective, there are times when being anxious just makes sense. Just to kind of share a little bit about my own story, I lost a baby late term pregnancy between my first and my third. So it was late in the pregnancy. And so when I was pregnant again a few years later with my daughter, who is perfectly healthy, by the way, I was really, really anxious pretty much the entire pregnancy. And like, why wouldn't I be, right? Like there are situations where like, of course we're heightened and attuned to what might go wrong. Of course we're worried. Of course we're sitting in that tension that is felt by both our minds and our bodies. Let's see. Yes. So then we have chronic anxiety. So chronic anxiety can be the result of a history of intense situational anxiety that just happens kind of over and over, like really difficult and traumatic life events, for example, or it can be a result of temperament or kind of a mix of both. And chronic anxiety tends to lend itself, gets in the way of us living a full life in the way that we actually want to live it. And I'll say, again, for example, like from my own life, my mom has a really anxious temperament, and she is the daughter of a mother who was also really anxious. My grandmother's name was Jean. And so for a really long time, the joke in our family, and this is mostly coming from my dad, whenever he'd get frustrated with my mom's anxiety in action, he would just say, well, it's Jean's genes. And we'd all kind of laugh and blow it off. And for the most part, my mom really wears that anxiety that's part of her with like almost a matter of pride, because it's part of the family story, right? So, and a lot of times she has thought that like her anxiety keeps her on her toes and protects all of us. And there have been times though when I've criticized her for it and suggested that she needs to work on it, which, don't moms love hearing from their therapist daughters what they need to work on? And her response though was like, why? Why would I change any of this? And I just said, well, because over the last few years, Mom, I've noticed that it's increasing the number of things that you say no to, and that affects like how, not because you're unable to, but because you're worried. And she asked me to give her some examples. And so I did. And her response was, oh, I don't think I was really aware of how much that's been happening, how much anxiety has been affecting what I say yes, or more importantly, what I say no to. So that to me is like a lovely story because it brings attention to this aspect of awareness. Like for my mom in that conversation, awareness happened. And since we had that conversation, she's been working on it and it's actually helped. And Nikki, you can go to the next slide there. And this kind of brings me to kind of a bigger point that I want to make, which was part of that conversation that I had with my mom years ago, which is, should I really change the way that I relate to anxiety? So here's kind of the litmus test, or kind of the thing to keep in mind when you're asking yourself that question. A healthy relationship with anxiety keeps our perspective broad so that we can see our options. Unchecked anxiety keeps us from recognizing both our perspective and potential. So if you're feeling like your options are gradually becoming narrower and narrower in life, like Nikki said at the very beginning, if you feel like anxiety is getting in the way of moving towards your values and what's important to you, then it's time to change the way you relate to it. And that's what we're going to be going into a little bit more. But in the spirit of awareness and how important it is to tackle awareness as a first step to really, permanent and positive change. Nikki's going to talk to us a little bit about growing in awareness around our emotions.
Thank you, Alex. So what even are emotions? Emotions give us information. And hopefully I set the animation up correctly. All right, anger. Anger is something letting us know that something we value is being threatened. So this can be a physical item, it can be a loved one, it can be an idea, it can be a belief, it can be something that you value in your life and somebody or something is threatening that. Guilt gives us the information that I have acted out of alignment with my values. Guilt also gives us the opportunity to, in the future, make a corrective action and move more in line with our values. And sadness. Sadness is a loss of something or someone that is important. So what I like to try to do, and Alex, you did a great job of doing this in your examples, that emotions are neither good nor bad. There are ways that they are helpful, and there are ways that we can respond to emotions that are not helpful. And they're, depending on who you are and your temperament and your personality, there are going to be different emotions that we have a harder time sitting with than others. And it's not everyone has a hard time with anger, because that's not accurate. Some people have a harder time sitting with anger. Some people have a hard time sitting with happiness. Some people have a hard time sitting with love. So it can be multiple emotions. And what I'm going to be showing y'all through how the lifespan of an emotion and what everything that is interconnected and the components of an emotion is, so that if you are having a hard time holding space and you are using the action urges that go along with that emotion and it's moving you in a way that you do not want to be moved, then we are going to look at the components, and just being able to name the emotion can sometimes be enough to help with the regulation of that emotion. Or if we are able to change any one of these interrelated components that I'm going to show you in the next slide, that will be enough to change our relationship to that emotion. So again, emotions consist of many interrelated reactions happening at the same time. They are neither good nor bad. They are an automatic response to internal and external events, and emotions will rise and fall. So this is our model for describing emotions. And this might seem like a lot on a slide, and I'm going to break each one down, and I'm going to do it with an example from my own personal life. So we will start at the prompting event. When I was in grad school, I used for my personal statement the character essay that you have to submit to go to undergrad or grad school. I talked about my lived experience from my recovery and my eating disorder and substance use. I got a bad grade on my very first paper in grad school. So my prompting event is the bad grade. My interpretations, thoughts, and beliefs around this prompting event were that I only got into grad school because of my character essay. It was a sob story and they just let me in. I do not deserve to be in grad school. I'm going to be a terrible therapist. You can see how I took one event and I had it map out my entire life for me. So I had some interesting interpretations about that one grade. We can also have misinterpretations about an event. For example, say a friend who texts you very quickly responds back to your text. You send a text and they don't respond to you. My interpretation around that event might be my friend no longer likes me. I did something to upset my friend. I did something weird, and this is their response to that. That could be a misinterpretation. And like I previously mentioned, if we change or reframe any of the components, it will change our relationship to that emotion. So in that situation, I could reach out to my friend and see what's going on. Getting more information, maybe their phone died, would be able to help me shift how I am responding to that emotion. Pre-existing vulnerability factors. This can include sleep. So maybe I didn't sleep well the night before I got my paper, so I'm already a little bit more emotionally vulnerable. Maybe not in my case, but another vulnerability factor could be using substances. It could be not taking your prescription medication as intended. It could be not eating regular meals. So there are multiple ways that we can already be a little bit more vulnerable starting out. It can be an old memory resurfacing. It can be a life stressor. Maybe you just had a really difficult conversation earlier in the day, and that has already made you a little bit more vulnerable. So then we go over to the biological changes. I notice I skipped attention and awareness. So let me backtrack to that. Attention and awareness is key in having an emotional response. So if I have a prompting event and I have no attention or awareness to that prompting event, I'm not going to have that emotional response. My example for that is, say you are walking down the street and you have your headphones in and you're listening to a great podcast or maybe some fun music. Somebody walks by you and says something unkind to you. I'm not going to have an emotional response to that because I have my headphones in and I have no awareness. If we're having an emotional response, there is some level of awareness. Doesn't mean we're fully aware. There's just some level of awareness there that there was something that prompted this response. Biological changes. When we are experiencing an emotion, we are having changes in our brain. We're having the neural firing. If we're feeling dysregulated, we have our parasympathetic nervous system and our sympathetic nervous system. And our sympathetic nervous system is responsible for our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response. And then our parasympathetic is what helps us calm down and regulate. So if we are feeling dysregulated, our parasympathetic has gone offline and our sympathetic has all of our attention. And that's not always a bad thing. If we're in danger, we certainly don't want to be taking in other information that we don't need in that moment. Experience, like Alex mentioned, we experience our emotions more than just in our cognitive space. We have body sensations that go along with it. When I experience anxiety, I get a tingling in my hands. I might get a little cold sweat going. And I get a little bit red as well. And as we previously mentioned, there's action urges that go along with that emotion. So anger will prompt us to fight or flight or freeze. It will prompt us into action. Expressions are face and body language, how we are responding to that emotion. Some of that is an automatic response. Some of it is a learned response. So if I'm having a conversation with somebody and I'm leaned back and I have my arms crossed in front of me, I'm giving the body language expression that I'm not really interested in this conversation. Maybe I'm angry. I'm giving off some type of emotion, right? So our face and our body language also are part of how we are experiencing our emotions. Our words, what we say while we are experiencing this emotion, and how we are telling people that we are experiencing the emotion. Some emotions are harder than others to share with people. Some emotions are more vulnerable to share with people that we are feeling. And actions, are we responding to the action urges that are going along with that emotional response? It's really challenging not to respond to them. It takes a lot of practice and skill work to be able to use an opposite action to that response. And then we want to name the emotion. So as you can see, even before we name the emotion, we're identifying all these other components that are going on all at the same time in our body, in our brain, maybe the things that went on earlier in the day, they're all playing a role in how we are currently experiencing that emotion. And again, like I mentioned earlier, that just naming the emotion is sometimes enough to help with that regulation. And then bringing awareness to it. We ask our clients to rate their emotion either from 0 to 100 or 0 to 10, whichever you prefer. And the higher end being the most intense you've ever felt this emotion. When you're at that higher end of the emotional rating, your brain is not fully functioning at that point. You're dysregulated, you are in your sympathetic nervous system, and using cognitive skills is unlikely to be helpful in that moment. And so at the end of the presentation, we are going to practice a skill that is more physical, that will help bring on the parasympathetic system back on. The after effects. Excuse me. So if we, I know I'm probably not alone in this room, have ever experienced a really strong emotion, there are after effects. We might still continue to feel it in our body after the emotion has dipped a little bit. We might continue to have thoughts and interpretations around this emotion. And it can also be a secondary emotion that is coming up for us. My example on that is with my dog. It's kind of silly, but if my dog gets close to the road and I yell at her to come back to me, what I am feeling is fear. And my secondary emotion is anger. She certainly only hears the anger, and there are multiple emotions going on. Maybe my anger, the secondary emotion is, or the anger, I can do a prompting event too for that, and I can continue to go on and spread awareness. And you might be thinking, why even do all of this? I don't know if you've ever been in the situation, I know I have, where maybe I reacted in a way that I wasn't fond of, and I had no idea why I did that. I know that a lot of my clients, and myself in the past included, would use a behavior and I would report back to my therapist, I was having such a great day. I don't know what happened. Everything was perfect. And maybe I did believe that. And what likely is happening is that I had lost that connection with my mind and my body. I had lost that awareness of what I was feeling. And it takes not a long time, but it takes practice to be able to identify where we are feeling our emotions and even what emotions we're feeling. We're not taught this in school. And so I want to encourage y'all to be compassionate with yourselves as you are moving through this journey, whatever journey you are on. And as you're working on trying to identify what are the things that are going on for me that are leading to some of these experiences that I'm not wanting to have.
All right, so in the spirit of awareness and naming emotions, I'm going to share with you a couple different tools that are designed to really help you, again, tune into what you're feeling, what's going on, and what I actually need. So the first tool is the feelings wheel. I have to say, as a therapist, someone who's been practicing for a long time, I always kind of get like almost self-conscious and embarrassed when we have things like feelings wheels, because it just seems like a little too playful and therapeutic and almost like a joke on SNL. However, a feelings wheel is a lovely, lovely thing. And here's why. Nikki was speaking to this point earlier, that a lot of times it's hard for us to name emotions beyond the first one that's showing up. A lot of times you may be thinking to yourself, like, I'm anxious or I'm frustrated. And frustrated and anxious can be these catch-all emotion words that actually have really nuanced and layered emotions that are tied into it. So this tool helps you kind of develop a more advanced language around your feelings so that you can better attend to why situations impact you the way they do and what's important to you and what you need. So the way that you would use this as a tool is to kind of start out in the very middle, like treat it kind of like a bullseye, and look at those most basic emotions in the very center. And maybe you might recognize that, okay, what I'm feeling is fearful. And then from there, you would branch out to the subset emotions that come off of fearful and think to myself, okay, well, maybe like, let's give an example. We could maybe give like the example of that Nikki gave around like getting a bad grade on her first paper. Maybe the first emotion is fear. Then after that, it's maybe I'm feeling insecure. Maybe I'm feeling rejected. Maybe then branching off of inadequate. If that makes sense. So it's, again, developing a more in-depth vocabulary around your emotions. And you might also recognize that you feel more than one of those center emotions. Maybe you feel fearful and also surprised. And then you can kind of branch off from there and kind of get curious with yourself as to where you're at. Next slide. And the next tool I'm going to show you is a mood log. And again, this is really intended to help you notice not just what you're feeling and what's going on around you, but to gain awareness of the ebb and flow of your mood. A lot of times I'll have patients come to me and we'll talk about how they're just constantly at an 8 out of 10 in terms of anxiety. And when we start to do a mood log together, they'll realize, actually, no, my mood does tend to fluctuate during the course of the day, depending on what's going on, depending on those pre-existing vulnerabilities that Nikki mentioned, and what skills we're willing to try. So as a model, I actually made this mood log that's more or less based on like a day that I had recently. And I would say, while you can use this as like a blank template, and I think we're actually going to create a PDF of this tool that you guys, that's blank, that you guys can use as a tool for yourselves. You can also, if it makes better sense, make a grid in a journal that you keep or in a notebook and do it exactly, that way as well. So for example, looking at myself in the morning, I noticed I felt like busy and tired. I would rate my intensity in terms of how I was feeling with distress at about a 7. Why was that? Well, what else was going on? I was running out the door with the kids, trying to get them to school. One of them threw a fit just as we were trying to get shoes on. And I'm like, tick tock, the pressure is on to get all the way through traffic and get these children into the building on time. And I'm pretty worked up. So the skill that I tried would be like, right after the toddler meltdown, I buckled the kids in, but before I got in the car myself, I took a deep breath, a couple deep breaths, and just kind of gave myself a minute before I got in the car. Mid-morning, I felt mood feelings, anxious, overwhelmed, inadequate. I'd rate that about a 4 out of 10, so mid-range. What else was going on? Well, I was about to have a really big meeting with my boss where she had asked me to like prepare a couple like important data points to be able to present to her. And there's always that worry of like, what if I'm not doing my job well enough? Am I in trouble? Is that why she's asking me for this data right now? Like, that's where the mind can go for me when I'm in that like inadequate, anxious, overwhelmed place. The skill I tried, did a little bit of self-talk, think about like, what are my values? What's important to me that can help me move through this? I made a list of talking points for the meeting just to kind of like get myself in a more organized space. Okay, so we'll kind of move through a little bit here. End of the day, early evening, I'm feeling annoyed, critical, pressured, anxious. Kind of anxiety's tipping up there a little bit. What's going on? Well, I'm in the routine with the kids after work. I drove home, across town to get home. There's lots of misbehaving. I'm just having that feeling of like, I'm over it. I'm over them for the day. And then there's a lot of pressure to like be the right kind of mom at that point in the day. Skill I tried, because I'm at that mid level of anxiety, it's headed up there, but it's still in that like 4 to 6 mid-range level. I can kind of use internal coping skills. So I can kind of talk to myself. I can name it to my partner and just say like, ugh, I'm just annoyed and just feeling it at the end of the day. He and I talked about our evening plan. So I can kind of create like a plan of like, what am I looking forward to? How can I ride this wave of anxiety to get through the rest of the night? So this would be kind of in a nutshell an example of how you can observe like the ebb and flow of your own mood, and also where you are attempting to try out different coping skills. So again, and actually, Nikki, if you want to move to the next slide, that would be great. Both of these tools are really all about understanding what you need. So first step is, like we've been talking about, is cultivating awareness. Second step is rating intensity. And then third step is trying a skill. And the thing to keep in mind, as Nikki and I have both said, is that intensity determines strategy. So if you are in a low to mid range in terms of distress, you can use those internal skills. You know, how do I talk to myself? So for me, a skill that I use a lot in terms of self-talk is to use the phrase, it makes sense that. So for example, you know what? I'm kind of over my kids right now, and I'm feeling kind of a little ashamed and a little self-conscious as a mom. The self-talk skill is like, it makes sense that I'm feeling this way tonight, after maybe because I spent 45 minutes in the car and things just aren't going right and the rhythm of the night is off, and you know, I'm parenting kids and while I'm working, so I question a lot whether I'm like doing enough. Yeah, it makes sense that I'm having these feelings. So that would be an example of an internal coping skill. When you are moving to that higher intensity place, I would say for most people, it's anything that's like a 7.5 out of 10 or above. Like Nikki said earlier, your parasympathetic nervous system is in overdrive, and we are not in a great place to think deeply about our values, have existential conversations about the person that we want to be, or do effective self-talk. That's when it's really time to employ an external coping skill, usually one that is sensory focused. And that is exactly what Nikki is going to show us now. It's an example of one of those types of skills.
Thanks, Alex. And like Alex mentioned, if we are this dysregulated, meaning that we are unable to alter the way that we are experiencing this emotion, it feels overwhelming, it feels very intense. That is what we're meaning when we say dysregulation. And our brain has stopped taking in new information in this moment. If we are this dysregulated. And so what we are needing to do is to get our brain back online. So we are trying to activate our parasympathetic nervous system so that we are able to start regulating ourselves. Because when we get to that anxious state, our parasympathetic has gone offline, and that is what we use to calm down. So we're staying in this anxious state. So the skill that I have is TIP. And if you're familiar with DPT, they love acronyms and they don't do acronyms well. So TIP stands for temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and the P that appears out of nowhere, paired muscle relaxation. So why would we use TIP? To change our body chemistry, to reduce our high emotional arousal. And it's easy to use. It doesn't take a lot of brain power and thought to be able to use this. So like Alex mentioned, we're using one of those external skills. And when would we use TIP? When we're feeling emotionally overwhelmed, we're feeling dysregulated, we are feeling like we are very highly aroused on the more towards the anxiety spectrum, whatever that emotion is that you are having a really hard time sitting with. Maybe you're in a crisis and you have a high urge to engage in an unhelpful coping mechanism. And I mention them as being coping mechanisms because they are, and you know that they work, and some of them work instantaneously. And so this is also a skill that will be fast acting, and it's not moving you away from your values. It's not creating any self-harm further down or any negative consequences further down, like maybe some of those more unhelpful coping mechanisms that we're trying to move away from. So, temperature. It's tipping our facial temperature with cold water. So the intention is to activate our dive response. And our dive response is what happens whenever humans or any mammal goes under cold water with no oxygen. So our heart rate will slow below our resting heart rate. If you have a medical condition that involves your heart, please do not do this. Consult your doctor beforehand. If you do not have a medical condition and you are wanting to bring your heart rate back down, then there are a few ways. You can use a bowl with cold water. You can use an ice pack. You can use a Ziploc bag or with ice, and then I do too. So I put one Ziploc bag with ice, and then I put water in the other part to make the cold water response. Or you can use a cold wet compress. With a bowl, with any of this, what you're wanting to do is bow your head down, and you want to put the ice pack, compress, whatever you're using, you want it to cover your cheekbones and your eye. So you want it to be over here. You can get your whole face, great. If not, then we just want to focus on this area. For your bowl of water, you want to submerge your face till you get to your temples. And you want to hold your breath for 30 seconds. I can't hold my breath for 30 seconds. I don't know about y'all. So I just do it as long as I can to help activate that dive response. And if you're unable to do any of those, sometimes just splashing cold water on your face is enough to do that temperature change. It can help us regulate. And these skills are intended to be used in a sequence. Some of them, if you're in public, are a little harder to use than others. So I recommend after this webinar, whenever you have time, practicing these skills. If you don't practice them and you're in a crisis, it's unlikely that you're going to think, oh, I remember that Alex and Nikki talked about a skill I could use. I'm going to bring that skill out, right? I don't know if that's ever happened in the history of using skills. So I encourage you to practice these skills over and over when you don't need them, so that when you need them, you already have that neural pathway and you know that's like almost like a reflex to be able to use the skill. And that's the intention with regulation and being able to identify, bring awareness to our feelings, is that eventually, if we do this over and over enough, if we start self-regulating, that it will become automatic. And we might not even notice that we are able to change our response to our emotions. So that is for temperature. Now exercise. Oh, went too far. Exercise. So engage in intense exercise. I primarily work with eating disorders. So often I will just skip this one or modify it to whatever feels that it is in your recovery journey to do, and that is in line with recovery. If that is not something that you are working on or that's not your journey, then engaging in intense exercise for 20 to 30 minutes has research that shows that it decreases negative mood and it increases positive affect after exercising. And if you are only able to do it for a little bit, then do whatever is accessible to you in that moment. The first P is for paced breathing. And paced breathing is the intentional slowing down of your inhales and your exhales. So your breathing out should be longer than breathing in. And this is going to activate a similar response to the dive response that we activated with the temperature. So again, it's getting our parasympathetic nervous system back online. This is that helps us self-regulate. So what I do is I inhale for 5 and exhale for 7. If that feels like too much, do what's accessible for you. Practice it, do whatever feels good for you, and do it for a minute. And again, I encourage you to practice these skills when you're not needing it so that you already know what it's familiar when you do need it. Paired muscle relaxation. Paired muscle relaxation is when we tense our muscle groups, and then as we're inhaling, and then as we exhale, we relax our muscle groups. And the goal is not to achieve a state of relaxation. So I just want to bring light to that. I don't want anyone to feel like, oh, I did this wrong. I'm not in a Zen state. That's not the goal. The goal is to increase awareness of that tension and the relaxation in our body. So again, bringing awareness to our body, our mind, and our body connection. So I like to start at my toes because I also do the progressive muscle relaxation, but tensing it and then releasing it. And when we tense and release, we are able to get into a more released state with our muscles than if we were just to bring awareness and try to release them. Oh, one more thing, Alex, so with TIP, the intention is not to make the emotion go away. The intention is to be able to decrease and to get your brain back online so that you can use other skills. And maybe those skills are reaching out to a friend. Maybe those skills are, like Alex mentioned, naming the emotion. Maybe it is doing something that brings you joy. It's not a form of avoidance. We're just trying to bring ourselves down so that we can use other skills to tolerate that emotion that's going on. So I always want to encourage people, after we do a distress tolerance skill or some form of distraction to lessen the intensity, that we do want to go back to that emotion.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Nikki. So a couple of things to kind of keep in mind tying all of this together. And we cannot emphasize these points enough, that if you are aiming to make progress in the way that you relate to and manage your anxiety, it just takes practice. Even the best skills take practice to master. I think about this all the time, like, so many of us, I think, sit in a place of kind of shame and self-judgment where we constantly are telling ourselves, like, why haven't I figured this out by now? Why can't I be better at this? And I've given this example actually to my patients before. I know that, I've got several children, and I, breastfed all of them when they were born. And, one thing that no one really told me was that learning to breastfeed is a skill. And I had been really entering into it from this place of like so much pressure that, well, this is what my body's made to do. Therefore, it should just come easily. I want it. I want to be able to do this. Therefore, I should just be able to figure it out. But really, learning how to effectively breastfeed my kids took time and practice. It was troubleshooting. There are variables outside of my own body and my own self that come into play, like this whole other human that's participating in it with me, right? Like, we're seldom working in a vacuum. So it just takes work and repetition and like the willingness to troubleshoot in order to feel like you're making progress. So, another thing that I would really love you guys to keep in mind is to take the toolbox approach, not the duct tape approach. And what I mean by that is this. I'll give you an example in my own life again. So my dad, Dan, lovely man, raised on a farm, raised in the rural Midwest with not a lot of resources. And so he's a really crafty guy. And by crafty guy, I mean, he will try to make the most out of a roll of duct tape to fix anything and everything. And the result of that is that there's a lot of places in my parents' house that are just covered in duct tape, and it drives my mom crazy, partly because it kind of works, but it always looks ridiculous. But it's just like the stubborn belief that he can fix it all with one tool. And I think where I'm going with this is kind of to Nikki's earlier point that there is really like no silver bullet and no one universal fix-it coping skill that's going to help you move through anxiety. If you are relying just on essential oils and smelling them as like your primary coping skill to manage anxiety, you're probably going to feel frustrated a lot. If you're relying solely on waiting till you get to an 8, 9, 10 out of 10 and doing the tip exercise, that's not going to sustain you long term either. The idea is to cultivate a deeper awareness, like we said earlier, about the thought that our emotions, even the difficult ones, are also tied to our deeper emotional needs. And the better we learn to lower our intensity of anxiety and distress so that we can start asking ourselves, wait a second, I'm feeling so strongly about this issue because something here really matters to me. What is it? I feel anxiety when I give a workshop presentation to people because what really matters to me at the end of the day is that, well, connection is a really big value of mine. I want to feel like people are connected to both us and the message that we're offering. And I believe in recovery. I believe deeply in the ability to change in a positive way. So yeah, all the intensity of emotions are tied to things that matter, right? When we're able to focus our attention more and more towards understanding what matters to us and how we want to move towards that, that is some of like our deeper level skills for moving through anxiety that can be most helpful. Also, community is a great source of healing. And, I can't say that enough. I think, getting to know, being in a deeper relationship with the She Recovers organization and Dawn has really shown us like the power of the healing community that you guys have. And it's a lovely, lovely thing. Moving through and developing a better relationship with your anxiety can absolutely happen when you are in community. Use your relationships, whether they're acquaintances or part of your like more intimate support system, lean into those as a way to provide like healthy distraction, lean into your values, learn about how other people cope and figure out how to navigate distress. Also, professional help can be a really excellent part of your healing community as well, whether that is attending support groups that are offered to you in the community, whether that's seeing an outpatient therapist in order to learn how to develop a new skill set and do self-work, or to lean in on a treatment center like Pathlight Mood and Anxiety. There's certainly lots of us out there. Lean into treatment and healing communities that can offer you more when you need more. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. Well, not everything, but a lot. And Nikki, did you want to give us a little bit of information on resources? And then we're going to shoot just some Q&A time.
Yes, and the takeaway I hope that we are leaving with, and that Alex and I have imparted on y'all who are watching this, is that anxiety is not bad. It's normal. And we are looking at not getting rid of anxiety. We're looking at how we respond to anxiety. And so if we use that model and the mood logging, then we are able to bring awareness to what is going on for us before we experience anxiety. And we can change some of the experiences before we have that emotion, or we can change how we respond to it. So again, we're not trying to get rid of the emotion. We're trying to work on how we are reacting and that relationship we have with that emotion. And like Alex mentioned, community is also one of my number one values. And She Recovers and Pathlight have communities for you to reach out to. She Recovers offers virtual support, peer recovery support, podcasts, online programs, and so much more. And Pathlight offers virtual support groups, treatment options, podcasts, blogs, and articles. And since you've registered, you will get a recording of this. You will get a PDF with the feelings wheel and a blank mood logging that we will send out to you. We will also include links to Pathlight and She Recovers so that you're able to access some of these resources and supports and learn about them if you've never heard of She Recovers or if you've never heard of Pathlight. We also, like Don mentioned in the beginning, we have 2 more sessions. We will be covering grief next, and then depression in December. And I hope that you will join us. And I am going to, oh, and the last slide, really quick, are our emails. Please reach out to us if you are needing additional support. We are happy to help. It's what Alex and I do. It's our job and it's our passion, right? We became therapists to be in this helping role and through our lived experiences. And so we want to be here to support you through your journey, whatever your journey might be. I'm going to stop the share, and Dawn, I see you are back on.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of a glitch with people accessing the new link for the webinar. I was getting some messages in our Facebook group, etc., saying that all they had was the meeting list, and apparently there was an email that went out, but it was once we were already started. So I'm not quite sure exactly what happened. Nonetheless, we had lots of people here, and a lot more will be able to benefit from this amazing presentation when we do provide the recording. So I guess, maybe a lesson learned for us as organizers about switching links, which I think we both, we all kind of thought, I wonder how this is going to work. But again, I recommend, excuse me, that everybody check out Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center. Obviously, these are experts, especially if you need a higher level of care. There's different ways of getting support out there. And although we do have wonderful, excuse me, support meetings every day, Pathlight has some incredible support communities and groups and meetings on daily as well. So I'm sure that those links will be provided to everybody who's out here. You've got them specifically for mood and anxiety and specifically for eating disorder, which is something that, although everybody is welcome to attend our more general meetings, and everybody does, we don't have this kind of specialized groups like Pathlight does. So please do check them out. And I just really want to say thank you again. This was incredible, Nikki and Alex. I'm really excited for October 28th, which will be our next session at the same time. Information will be provided to anyone who's registered for that. And then after that, on December 2nd, we're going to be talking about skills building for grief. And I just need to say that this practical, hands-on, using actually very straightforward techniques is what I think so many people need. We can provide all the other community support pieces, but this is really, really incredibly useful information. And I know it's going to help a lot of people in our community and yours and anybody who's been accessing this. So I just really want to thank you.
Thank you, Dawn.
Yeah,
and also just, I think our links, maybe our websites, for those of you who don't know, our website is www.sherecovers.org, and your website is
pathlight.behavioralhealth.com.
Great. Awesome.
Thank
Is
you.
there anything else, Nikki or Alex?
No, we will get this email out in the next 2 weeks, and I look forward to seeing all of y'all next month, and we will have the link situation fixed, and it is already ready to go. So we won't have any last minute changes.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
everybody.